I'm going to start with regard to our first speaker this afternoon by introducing the introducer, Peter Park, who was the planning director in Milwaukee when our principal speaker, John, was the mayor there, and was very much involved in taking down a freeway in that city and its positive consequences. And he also served as the planning director here in Denver. So, Peter, if you'd be so kind, thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm very happy to see you all and seeing a lot of friends here, and especially my friend for a long time, John Norquist. Before I get to this, I want to show you this picture. It's from 1911 in Milwaukee, and just by way of introduction, John wasn't the mayor in 1911, but the city was growing, and this image to me is a beautiful image of how you make a city, how you grow a city along a great boulevard. You create places for transit and for people walking, and you plant it in such a way that it creates such a street that people would want to be on that street. You create value. It's infrastructure that creates value. It's the most reasonable way to invest our public money. Now, this was inspired by an idea of making cities called the City Beautiful. This is some pictures from the 1893 exposition. Mayor Speer of Denver went to that, and he was inspired. And many of you know many of the accomplishments of the Speer administration and what a legacy that was. He had commissioned plans for the park system and parkway system in Denver, which we still take great advantage of and we still enjoy today. What you might notice, I don't know if there's a laser on here, but along the top of both of these drawings is 48th and 46th, which is actually considered to be, right, one of the major important elements of this. And we know the legacy of Speer in the many places and beautiful places that we have in the city, around the city. This is not one of them in terms of the legacy in the spirit of what Speer was trying to do. In fact, it is an example of the failed American experiment. And I say failed, as James was saying before, right, there are cities that are taking freeways out. It was an idea that had not been tested before. We put it into cities, it didn't work. We don't need to continue to do that. There's not a single neighborhood in the country that got better when a freeway was cut through it. I've looked, I've researched this a lot. I've not found a neighborhood that got better. But there are many examples in this country and around the world where a freeway was taken out of the city and it got better. In fact, there's not a single example of where a freeway was removed from a city and bad things happened. They are all positive things. So it's not a theory, right? It's not a theory at all. My friend Ian Lockwood, who's an engineer, does all these wonderful drawings, and I spent a good deal of time with him. And he boils it down to this way of thinking about it. If we think about the capacity of a street, and we only think about accommodating future traffic, then we only make things that are for traffic. I call them traffic sewers, okay? Because that's all they're meant to do, is to drain the traffic. But if you were for making cities, you would think much differently, that the ingredients that would go into the discussion would be first and foremost about people, that the fundamental unit of measure is the mobility of people and the walking distance and the enjoyment of making walkable urban places. So the thing about the freeway, and it's actually a simple design flaw. The freeway, the highway, is designed, and it's often called a limited access facility. Limited access, okay? Cities and urban places have from the very beginning been about access and exchange. Getting to places in the social, economic, cultural exchange. That's what makes cities. The limited access highway set into the fabric of an urban place kills the fabric. It harms it. But cities and places and people are resilient enough that if you just extract that, it comes back. And John, I'm sure, will show some examples of this. John Norquist is the outgoing, he's an outgoing guy, but he's the outgoing president and CEO of the Congress for the New Urbanism. And under his leadership, CNU has become an even more significant influence on how cities are made and how cities and regions are improved. my time with him, I was the planning director with him for just over 8 years. And under his leadership, we were able to do incredible things. The business of taking freeways out of cities is not a technical issue, right? Like, you can count the cars, it's not a technical issue. It's a political issue, because we know that we can do it. John is the kind of leader, when he was the mayor, that led the effort to help take the freeway out of the city. Had we followed the normal process of EIS and evaluation and everything else, I guarantee you the Park East Freeway would still be standing in downtown Milwaukee. It takes extraordinary courage, leadership, and political will to change these things. And we've got great examples all over the world where that has happened. And we're very, very fortunate to have one of those kind of leaders here in the room today, John Norquist.
Okay, well, thank you, Peter. And, I had a relationship with him where it was really good, because planners aren't used to having elected officials say, "Hey, you got any ideas?" When does that ever happen? All right, so the Congress for the New Urbanism, wait, that's me. Here's the Congress for the New Urbanism. It's about 2,500 architects, engineers, planners, landscape architects, developers, local officials, cranky people, and even some people that are happy occasionally. We're for urbanism. I don't know what new really means, but I know why we put it there 20 years ago when the organization was founded. Urbanism was so stigmatized that we used the word new as a modifier to try to get around that problem. I don't know if you remember that, but like back in the early 90s, cities were all about crime and failure, economic failure and so forth. And I always found that to me, cities were interesting, exciting, and when I became mayor, I didn't want to be about saying how rotten my city was, go to the federal government and say, our city's falling apart, we're about to burn up in riots, give us more money. I mean, who the hell would want to put money where it's going to all burn up? That was my attitude. And instead, what I thought was that the cities could grow strong on their own. And if you think about it, like just take, for example, food. If you want restaurants, probably the best and worst restaurants in the state of Colorado are in Denver. I mean, you have all the depending on your taste, you have all the different, and it's true of so many things where the city, the more big, the more complex it is, the more you find what you want. So I had a positive view of cities, and so I looked for things that I thought would unleash that value. And one of the things that really occurred to me very strongly and had for a long time was, because I got into politics fighting a freeway going through Frederick Law Olmsted Park on the southwest side of Milwaukee. So anyway, I want to, just talk a little bit about Denver. It's beautiful, and that's your little pedestrian place, and it's fun to go there. Or the train station, the beautiful, beautiful train station. And then, you get stuff like this, and it's not quite so beautiful. And how did that ever happen where so much money is spent on stuff that's so butt ugly? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add value to the city. It didn't add value to Milwaukee. And then once it's built, a lot of vehicles are on it, so then they say, well, what are you going to do with all the traffic? I guess we'll have to make it bigger. That's the only thing that we could possibly think of. It fails at rush hour. It fills up and it's crowded at rush hour, so we better make it bigger so it'll fill up even more and fail even more at rush hour. Roads, they haven't added value. You take them out, the value comes back. So why keep making them bigger? Why do that? What's the purpose of it? But this is Crystal City near the Reagan Airport in Virginia, across the river from DC. And you know, that's a grade separated road where you can't walk on it, and it goes right through the same kind of buildings that Corbusier had in mind. And you see this scene all over the place, particularly near airports. Now, another guy who really loved big grade separated roads, another proponent, one of the pioneers and fathers of the freeway system, Oscar Niemeyer, who was a brilliant architect too, in addition to that. And he lived in France most of his life, but he's Brazilian, and he was one of the two designers of Brasilia, a city where all the streets, all the thoroughfares are all grade separated in the city. Here's one of the underpasses. Maybe that'll be the model for the underpass that I-70 has in mind. But it's the deadest place on earth. It's an entire city that's all just grade separations and glass and steel buildings with grass around them. And in order to have fun in Brasilia, you have to go to the slums outside. That's where the bossa nova and all the good food and all the entertainment, that's where you have to go. You have to leave that city, that ideal utopian city. And the idea of grade separations in cities is utopian. This is Wicker Park. And Wicker Park, this is the center of it, North Avenue, Milwaukee Avenue, and Damon, right at the Blue Line stop, which is the most interesting stop in the Chicago transportation system, L system. And all of these streets have one moving lane in each direction. They have parking, including at rush hour. They all handle at least 30,000 cars a day. And they are hopelessly congested. But not just with traffic. They're also congested with strong real estate prices, restaurants that are packed with customers, people that live in the apartments above the shops. It's one of these places like Yogi Berra described New York City, particularly Manhattan, once. He said, "Nobody goes there anymore, it's too crowded." Okay, so this violates all the rules of traffic engineering. Level of service D and F. You know, in the middle of the night, maybe at 2 in the morning, it gets up to level C. It's hopeless. It just breaks all the rules, but it's valuable. There's jobs there. There's artists there. They want to be there. Another place like that is Dundas Street in Toronto, where you have a streetcar sharing the lane, one lane in each direction. And then it goes right through Chinatown and a number of other ethnic neighborhoods. And it's always packed because people love being there. And there's lots of money being made. And that's what cities are all about. Commerce, social interaction. Sure, you can go up the philosophical scale. There's philosophers and religion. Anyway, you get into these cities and then the spirit soars and all of a sudden you get these beautiful, beautiful churches. And you get mixed uses, like this street in Milwaukee, Kinnickinnick Avenue, 19,000 cars a day. And it has short little blocks, so if things congest, you go over to the next street. And it has a hardware store, a tavern, bowling alley. There's a really cool little Gothic store where you can buy things that go with pins in your face and stuff like that. And everything does. Everything has to be, spread out, and you have to drive everywhere. This is more interesting, to be able to walk down the block and occasionally even experience something new and interesting and exciting, or see an old friend you haven't seen for a while. And it doesn't just have to be in old cities. This is Hamburg, not Germany. This is Hamburg, New York, which is a sort of a posh suburb of Buffalo. And they had a big fight with the New York State DOT. They wanted to take all of the street and have 2 lanes in each direction because their traffic analysis proved beyond anyone's ability to contradict them that they must have that. But Hamburg organized. They went out of their way to resist, and they finally won. And there it is. And you know what? The New York State DOT got an award for this configuration. And the village president of Hamburg was polite and considerate enough not to rub it in at the ceremony. And this is your Colfax. I just pulled that off the internet, but you know, there's nothing, you know, the street doesn't have a grass median, and the street lights are pretty simple. You know, it doesn't have to be real fancy-dancy. When I've been on Colfax, and it's really like in the store windows, you know, being able to see the merchandise in the windows, that's what really makes it exciting. You don't need banners or any of that. The banner salesman should be sent away, which I was glad to see that they didn't have any banners. But it's a street that people like. They gather, you know, if you went away from Denver for a couple of years on military duty or whatever, and you'd think about Colfax when you're homesick, you know, you'd want to, no, did I say it right? Anyway, but would you feel homesick to be back here? You know, this happens to be outside of Milwaukee, but you know, it's got the big streets that are only for driving. If you walk along the street, you're like a criminal suspect. And then all of the uses are separated into pods. So you have a retail pod. You know, the idea behind separate use zoning was sort of logical. Yeah, let's order. The city's messy and disorganized. Let's order it. We'll put the retail here, and we'll put the offices over here, and then we'll have the apartments here, and we'll have the single-family homes here, and then the duplexes on this section, and then the really rich people can live alone. We don't want them to be contaminated with the poor people, so they'll have their own section. And that's if you look at the new stuff built in the last 50 years, it pretty much follows that pattern. But fortunately here in Denver, you have a form-based code, which kind of helps you have more diversity in housing types and all that. So you're working on it. But this is basically the default. This is what we've had for the last 50 years. Separate use zoning and streets that are only for cars, and they don't fulfill throughout thousands of years of human history, there have been three purposes for a major thoroughfare going through a community, like say ancient Rome or ancient Greece, Athens or whatever. You have a street, and it wouldn't just be for moving chariots and other things like that. It would be also a place where you sell stuff. You want to buy a statue of Julius Caesar? Well, I notice he's just a little bit over there. Yes, I'll have two. Thank you. And then there's social interaction. So people, the Greek agora, market, so they would meet there, and you'd see somebody you hadn't seen in a couple of months and be happy that you saw them, or unhappy depending on who they are. So this is the kind of street that is automatically put in place today. This would be the standard 72-foot arterial with a 20-foot median, so you can have the double left turn lane at the intersection, and everything's about moving traffic, and then a 100-foot clear zone on each side to make it safer. Of course, it doesn't make it safer, because if you have a 100-foot clear zone on each side, that's telling you to drive really fast. I'm on the Bonneville Salt Flats. The speed limit is 40 miles an hour. I'm going 85, and there ain't no cops. So there you are. And that's what we get. And you can see the role of the pedestrian. There's a little path that's being formed along the side. Or as a variation, maybe you'd walk in the gutter. You know, and this is all standard operational procedure. This is what you get for your tax dollars. Now, the city that really was impacted by this policy of the thing that really matters is to move cars fast is this one. This is, might surprise you, this is Woodward Avenue in Detroit, right after World War II. You have 3 department stores, Hudson's, Kearns, Crowley's, and the sidewalks are packed, and there's 300 miles of streetcar lines converging on the downtown, and it's congested, and they worked very quickly to decongest the city. And it is the most successful decongestion of a city ever encountered in terms of road building. They tore out all the transit, put in the freeways, every freeway they could think of. You know, so the roads really, really helped. They did not, I'm not even going to be sarcastic. Those roads just bled Detroit blind. Look at that. They spent billions and billions of dollars building freeways, tore out their transit system. You know what the biggest public works project in the state of Michigan is going on right now? $1.6 billion to widen I-94 in Detroit. The city's bankrupt. They have no retail or anything else, and that's their priority. How dumb can you get? Now, this is San Francisco, the Embarcadero Freeway, which was built in front of the ferry terminal where the old beautiful Embarcadero Boulevard used to go. So they fixed it. They tore down the freeway and put it back in place, put the street back. You know, the property values there went up 300%. Now, I-70, that's not going through a place like the Embarcadero, which is next to the financial district and has a view of the bay and all that stuff. But just think about how stupid it was to build something like that that would degrade property value. For what? So people could drive fast? But it didn't even do that. After they tore it down, they found out that the majority of the trips got faster because people could go where they wanted to go. They didn't have to go to the end of the freeway to Broadway Street and then come back. And so all the freeway did was concentrate traffic and then congest at the nodes. It's a rural form that doesn't belong in the city at all. And in most European cities, it's not there, and then they haven't built freeways in Canadian cities for a long time either. Now, the most dramatic example in the world is in Seoul, South Korea. In this freeway, which was built in the early 60s, carried 160,000 cars a day. They tore it out, and the whole area is revitalized. It was on top of a river, which now is exposed again. People can see the river. And it works just fine. In fact, they've torn down 16 grade separations altogether. Not all of them are along freeways. Some of them are just flyovers on intersections. But the goal in Seoul, South Korea is to eliminate all the freeways within the outer ring road because they all cause traffic problems, degrade the value of property, and ruin the life in whatever neighborhood they're in. And I know this sounds radical. It's completely counterintuitive to think that if you tear down a big road and put in smaller roads, that things would get better in terms of traffic. And there's a guy who did it, Lee Myung-bak. He was elected mayor in 2001. By 2003, he had the freeway down. He put in the roads. And then he got elected president. And he was the conservative. He's the conservative guy. He's from the Conservative Party. And he did this because he knew it would add value to Seoul. All right, and Portland, your rival Portland, they always think they're better than Denver. I don't know why that is, crazy people. But in 1975, they had a freeway there on the waterfront, and they tore it down. Governor Tom, whatever his name was, McCall, he, a Republican, supported tearing that down. And nobody wants to put it back. Can you imagine? There it is. Put it back. Well, what a disaster that would be. Water engineers, the Army Corps, the Bureau of Land Reclamation, all these people, they've come a long, long way. The Army Corps of Engineers knows that they know that wetlands are good. So anyway, a wetland, it absorbs water congestion. It sucks it up. And it's a setting for plants and animals and other good things that happen. And the real estate value near a wetland is good. Just stay out of the drainage zone. But wetlands, they have bats and birds, eat all the bugs. And actually you'll find that it sells real estate, like Walden Pond in Massachusetts. And so we like wetlands. We don't do this anymore. But this is exactly what putting a freeway through the complexity of the street grid of the city, which is like a wetland, which absorbs congestion and is a setting for property value and jobs. This is what putting a freeway is like. It's like paving a stream, and it screws up the whole system. Now, unfortunately, it's natural for the US DOT and the state DOTs to think that big stuff is what they should be about. Long trips from one end of Colorado to the other. And that's because their goal is too narrow. Their goal is battling congestion. But congestion isn't all bad. Congestion is like cholesterol. You have good cholesterol, you have bad cholesterol. If you don't have, even if you have to even have some of the bad cholesterol. If you don't have cholesterol, you die. And cities die if they're not somewhat congested. And it's good congestion if you own a store on Colfax and somebody comes along and parks there during rush hour, and they come into your store and they plunk down a $20 bill and buy a t-shirt, suddenly that congestion looks pretty good to you. And so that's the difference. Now, with I-70, the bad congestion is about 10%. That's the through traffic that doesn't do anything for the neighborhood. But the rest of it is city traffic. This is the street grid of Buffalo, and they have before they put in all the freeways, it worked great. It was the richest city in the world. I mean, the richest city in America per capita income in 1900. And then they screwed it up by trying to solve their so-called congestion problem. That's Atlanta's street grid, which is totally screwed up now. And this is in San Francisco, the Central Artery, which screwed up their grid, but they got rid of it. And they put in a boulevard. And it's got 2 moving lanes in each direction in the middle, and it's got slip lanes on the side, as they're called. And so you can go on the side lanes for your local, more localized trip. And it's beautiful, and everybody loves it, and the property values got stronger, and there was more housing built. Some of it you could even afford. And that's the way it looks. And it's all connected to every street it goes by. It's connected. So it's for the whole neighborhood. That's how it looks in profile. And that's what you should want for I-70. It'll work just fine. It'll work better at rush hour than a freeway because it'll connect to the street grid, and that way, if it congests a little bit, some people get off and get out of the way. And when you drive a little slower, you can have smaller distance. Well, Peter will tell you all about that in a minute. All right. Now, things are changing quickly. The traffic engineers are represented by a group called the Institute of Transportation Engineers. And they did this book, and they let us at CNU help them do it, because a lot of our members that are engineers are also members of ITE. And we produced this book, which is Designing Walkable Urban Thoroughfares, a Context-Sensitive Approach. And last September, the Federal Highway Administration embraced it as the guide to flexibility in urban context. And so the Colorado DOT needs to be directed to this book to find the federal guidance that they should follow. They need to look at that, and it'll find out that it's okay to do 10-foot lanes instead of 12 or 14-foot lanes. It's okay to do a boulevard instead of a freeway. All right, and this is transitioning straight into Peter. VMTs are dropping fast. Young people aren't driving as much. Car ownership is way down. It's really foolish to expand I-70. I mean, it is really breathtakingly stupid to do that. And I hope that you don't do it. Revisit the issue. I know it's too late. It's always too late. You know, it's too early when you start complaining and they say, well, it's too early. We haven't made a decision yet. And then all of a sudden, magically, bam, just like that, it's too late. It's not too late. They don't have enough money to build I-70 the way they want. And I have brochures for CNU 222 outside.
John, we thank you for your subtle, indirect advice that it's breathtakingly stupid. That's right on the money.